So, a large part of this video is going to be dedicated to the topic of sky burial. The real-world history I'll be summarizing was sourced mainly from Wikipedia. If you'd like to research more, just be aware that doing a Google search for sky burial and even looking at the Wikipedia article will result in some graphic photos, including human corpses. I'll include a link to an Atlas Obscura article by Meg Van Huygen in the video description. This article does not contain any graphic imagery, so it should be safe for viewing by anyone. Thanks for watching.
This is where the ancient barbarians offered their honoured heroes to the winds. To seek winds in life and meet winds in death. That was the warrior's code. And all that's left here now is a fine pile of dust.
The root of this video was the item description for the Adjudicator's shield, which we find in a ruined room above his boss arena. A large wooden shield that depicts a brightly colored scene of the deceased being judged. On the other side, an epigram is carved in old script. Cowardly acts and the eating of birds must not be the deeds of a hero of storms. If the one being judged displeases the Adjudicator's master, the Golden Crow, the deceased soul will be gnawed upon until nothing but their bones remain. Its user will recover HP a little at a time. The phrase that sticks out to me here is the eating of birds. A dietary restriction seems like an odd detail to include here, especially when so many other details are omitted. It's tempting to just write this off as part of the Souls series' goofy sense of humor, but I think there's an answer here that makes a lot of things fall into place. But first, let's establish what the Adjudicator is. The Adjudicator name is literal. It was a figure in the Shadowmen's mythology which judged or adjudicated the souls of warriors. We know from the meat cleaver that his weapon transforms sinners into delicious-looking cuts of meat, and the Adjudicator Archstone says that he gives seals of the hero to the dead. The dead that pass its judgment are taken to be purified, and those that don't are consumed by its master, the Golden Crow. It's important to note that, in my opinion, the Adjudicator probably never existed as an entity. The final Shrine of Storm's Archstone explains that the Storm King is the embodiment of the thoughts of Shadowmen from hundreds of years ago. We know from Boletarian Palace that the demons can take forms that are representations of human thought. The demons of that location take forms that correspond to King Alant's knights. It seems that the legends and the thoughts around them are seedbeds for demonic forms. The Adjudicator and Storm King are likely the same, but instead of being formed from the thoughts of the living, they are formed from the thoughts of the dead. But let's go back to the Adjudicator's shield and the eating of birds phrase. Let's consider sky burial. Put simply, sky burial is the process of allowing corpses to be eaten by scavenging birds, typically vultures, instead of burying or cremating them. It's been historically used in some East Asian areas, most notably Tibet, an autonomous region of the People's Republic of China. Tibetan Buddhism is overwhelmingly the predominant religion in Tibet, with 78.5% of people identifying as adherents. In Buddhism, it's understood that the human body is separated from the soul in death and is reborn, so the dead body itself holds no special significance. Cremation is the most common type of funeral in Buddhism, but any practice is generally permissible. In Tibet, though, fuel for cremation is scarce since the high altitude places many villages above the tree line, and a layer of permafrost extends over most of the region, making a literal burial very difficult. The preparation of bodies for sky burial can appear quite brutal from a Western Christian cultural lens. The body is kept in a sitting position for 2 days, and Buddhist lamas, which are basically priests, and monks will continuously recite prayers over the deceased. The corpse's spine is broken so that it can be folded and wrapped tightly in cloth to be transported to the charnel ground. Once the body is laid out at the site by a rogyapa, or body breaker, they will begin to cut the flesh to attract vultures. Once a crowd of birds is formed, the rogyapa will step back and allow them to have the body. The vultures can eat quickly and consume most of the meat and flesh in under a few hours. When bones and cartilage remain, the rogyapa will use a hammer or mallet to break them up and mix them into a paste, which is combined with barley flour, tea, or yak butter. This pulp is then left out to be consumed by more scavenging birds. Almost nothing is wasted, which is another motivation for sky burial. In the Tibetan language, sky burial is referred to as Ja Tor, which literally translates to alms for the birds, alms being an archaic term for charity. It is considered a final act of generosity for the body to be used in this way. In modern times, the practice has become a bit rare. It was banned in China during the Cultural Revolution until the 1980s, which coincided with state closures of temples that practiced it. While today it is legal again in some areas, vulture populations have diminished and cremation has become much cheaper, so it's limited to just a few operating monasteries. When we consider the Shrine of Storms with this in mind, we start to make sense of the details. The eating of birds would be taboo for the Shadowmen because it would be cannibalism by proxy, eating a creature that has possibly eaten a human. In the hallway below the Adjudicator, Blige says,
And all that's left here now is a fine pile of dust.
I've never been so wrong about a dig. I've disgraced the Blige line of grave robbers.
This isn't because Blige has failed to find treasure to loot. There's a lot here. It's because there are no graves at all. We also have to acknowledge some differences here. In Tibetan Buddhism, sky burial is available to anyone, regardless of standing. In the culture of the Shadowmen, it is reserved only for warriors, and even then, probably only a select few. There is also no text or evidence of generosity being a factor here. It's motivated differently by the Shadowmen's worship of storms and their desire to meet them in death. After beating the Adjudicator, we come upon a complex tiered room containing an altar at one end with a door to the outside on the other. This is where we find our first Reaper presiding over the altar, and their spectral Shadow Lurker minions. The Reaper's design obviously fits thematically with the focus on death and the afterlife here, but I think it also supports our Sky Burial read in a couple of interesting ways. The group prayer shown earlier is one. The Lama is surrounded by a congregation of monks chanting over the deceased. Our Reaper has his own congregation, and when slain, they dissipate. The noises made by the Lurkers could not really be described as chants, but then again, they aren't really people anymore either. The blade of the Reaper is also notable. Let's remember the Rogyapa. The preparation of bodies for sky burial includes numerous deep lacerations, and sometimes even dismemberment. It is not difficult to imagine the judged warrior's body carried to the altar, monks chanting on the walkways and ground level, and the head lama making the necessary cuts and breaking of bones. We have to address why the Shadowmen would perform the breaking of bodies indoors rather than on the charnel ground itself, as is done for real-life sky burial. Demon Souls introduces the concept of purification to the ritual. The Adjudicator Archstone that we mentioned earlier references it, and it's reiterated in the old Hero Archstone. After purification, Hero's remains are offered to the Storm King. His wings cover the sky, and he is accompanied by storm beasts. In Tibetan Buddhism, bodies would not need purification. There is nothing inherently spiritually impure about death. The rituals around sky burial are intended to allow the soul to leave to be reincarnated, and allow the living to pray on that soul's behalf. It seems like the language of sky burial is being used, but again we have to shift a bit of our understanding to get the full picture. Japan, like Tibet, widely practices Buddhism. However, it is heavily bled over with the traditional Japanese folk religion of Shinto, and a large number of people practice both. In Shinto, purity is a large concept with many points of articulation, and unlike Tibetan Buddhism, death is always considered an ingress point for impurity. Kagare is an important term for impurity in the Shinto tradition. We might also translate it as pollution, defilement, or stagnation. Many things can be sources of Kagare, like childbirth or excrement, but death is the most significant one. Kagare is more than just physical, however. It is a deep, spiritual impurity which must be ritually cleansed, typically using running water. If you are familiar with many of the lore interpretations of Bloodborne and Dark Souls 3, you know this concept is repeated in the series. Shinto is most typified by belief in kami, which are spirits that can inhabit living and non-living things. These can be discrete objects like rocks or trees, broad places like rivers or caves, or even people in some special cases. Shrines in Shinto are erected to house and nurture a relationship with these kami, and in Shinto, allowing impurity to befall a kami would be extremely disrespectful, and could cause any number of catastrophic events. The Shadowmen are not Shintoists, or Buddhists for that matter, but thinking of the Storm King as a kind of kami answers why this purification is important. As dead bodies are an incredibly potent source of impurity, to present them to a kami would require an intense purification to keep the kami from becoming tainted itself. We see fountains full of gleaming fluid on the walls and the side stairwells here, and several puddles of the same liquid on the ground floor. The source of this liquid is in the lowest part of the interior, in a great phosphorescent pool. This fluid causes the slugs to create sticky white stuff per its item description. This is evidenced by the fact that these slugs drop it, but the identical slugs in the Valley of Defilement don't, so it definitely has some magical properties. The altar completes the picture. Like the altar in the first Reaper's room, this would be another stop for a hero of storms. Here the Shadowmen would use the phosphorescent fluid to treat the body after it has been cut open. The magical properties of this fluid would purify the body, or so the Shadowmen believed. The liquid was also brought up to other parts of the shrine, perhaps for the living Shadowmen to purify themselves in these rituals. After passing through the cavern, we reach the old hero's chamber. This is actually the same room where we fight the second and third Reapers, and we walk right past the statue holding the old hero demon on our way here. When the shrine was in repair, Shadowmen could walk directly to this room without passing through the phosphorescent pool cavern as we did. The old hero's lore is pretty simple. He's just an exceptionally venerated Shadowman, apparently known as the Seeker of Storms. The cutscene cuts in a way that makes it look like the statue is coming to life, but we can look up during the fight and see that it's really just that the old hero is a phantom that emerges from the statue. In addition, when you strike the old hero, it sounds just like hitting a black phantom in multiplayer. It's most likely his soul form, which has been twisted by a demon. The well-known mechanical wrinkle of this fight is that the old hero is blind, or at least blindfolded. It's actually quite hard for a vulture to tear into thicker flesh, so when scavenging, they will go for the softer tissue first, which, of course, are the eyes. The old hero's blindness is symbolic of his burial. Another small observation on his design, he doesn't have any lips, like the Adjudicator and maybe the figure on the Shadowman Archstone. It's hard to tell since the stone is heavily stylized. I don't know what this means, or if it means anything. Maybe they just really needed some chapstick at the Shrine of Storms. The most interesting thing is that this is the only place in the entire shrine where we see what actually appear to be real tombs. On the right side of the chamber as we enter, we see a handful of alcoves with some wrapped skeletons inside. This appears incongruous with sky burial as the point of the shrine, but remember that the Shadowmen reserved this for their warriors only. It's entirely possible that the priests or other figures of their religion would receive this respected but separate funeral rite. A final detail. The last two altars, the one in the phosphorescent pool and the one in the old hero's chamber, have corpses laid out on them. The corpse in the pool is wearing the fluted armor set, which is used by the knights of the relatively advanced region of southern Boletaria, so we know that this corpse was not one of the Shadowmen or anything. The second one is in some nondescript garb, so we don't know their origin, but the fact that the body hasn't rotted yet means it's probably not a Shadowman either. Both of these are likely people that came to the shrine recently, probably Nexus-bound slayers of demons like ourselves. Lastly, we reach the Archdemon of the Shrine of Storms, the Storm King. We've already sort of covered what the Storm King is. It's the god in the Shadowman's mythos that they offered warriors to. The Morian blade, made from the Storm King's soul, offers one final nod towards sky burial. A gnarled, thorny large sword of black quartz. Forged from the soul of the demon Storm King, it is actually the marrow of the storm beasts. These beasts take pleasure in the wielder's peril, and in these situations, the blade's attack power is greatly increased. The storm beasts represent vultures. They take pleasure in the peril of the wielder, just as a pack of vultures will circle a dying human for days, waiting for their meal. This arena is the wind-blasted coastal barren where corpses would finally be laid out for sky burial. There are some monoliths with what appears to be a runic script. These monoliths are what powers the Storm Ruler's special attack. The runes are an odd choice, but then again this is already a real clash of cultures. The hat worn by the figure on the archstone represents a pandita, which is a traditional garb in Tibetan Buddhism, but the skeletons use Central European falchions and Japanese katanas. Their vest is vaguely South American, and now we know the writing system is ancient Scandinavian. Now that we've reached the end and we've assembled all the evidence, let's zoom out a bit. Why does it matter that the Shadowmen use Sky Burial? Fundamentally, what does the Shrine of Storms add to Demon Souls? One of the common refrains that we hear about the Souls series is that it's medieval European fantasy as filtered through a Japanese cultural lens. The combination of familiar settings and iconography with unfamiliar themes and cosmology is powerful and evocative. The Shrine of Storms is the same, but instead of a European setting, it's a Central Asian one. It's Tibetan Buddhism through the lens of Japanese culture and Shinto. While we have delved deeply into the Shadowmen's religious beliefs and rituals, we must also reconcile this with what we find in the present.
This shrine was used in a ghastly ritual by an ancient tribe. They've long perished, and now demons have put the souls to work.
The skeleton enemies here commonly drop soul remains, which are the remnants of an old hero's soul drifting partially into another world. We know that the demons are motivated by their need to consume souls. If there were no living humans here, why would they come? Blige has already explained it. The Shadowmen's souls remained. It's important to remember that, unlike Dark Souls, Demon Souls has a monotheistic pantheon. There is only God, and God is the Old One, the consuming force that we struggle against. For the Shadowmen, Sky Burial was an escape, a way to ascend to something greater. But in Demon Souls, there is no escape. The noble death that they aspire to is denied, and they stagnate here until they are used up by the demons. When viewed this way, the Shrine of Storms and Sky Burial fit into Demon Souls' pessimistic, desperate worldview. Sky Burial shows us the way that a culture in this world might view and mythologize the afterlife, and also gives us an understanding of the real way that death articulates in this universe. Thanks for sticking with me this far. This was a topic that I've been tossing around for a long time, and I'm glad that I was able to collect my thoughts and come to some conclusions I haven't seen explained elsewhere. If you have anything to add or think I got something wrong, drop a comment. My understanding of Buddhism and Shinto is entirely through online research, so definitely let me know if I got anything wrong. I have some more Demon Souls video ideas that I'm tossing around and writing, both smaller and larger than this one. Keep an eye on the channel if you'd be interested in those. As always, good night.